The land had turned quiet in the way only the dying do, still, heavy, breathless. Dust curled across the broken earth like smoke. A rusted windmill groaned on its axis, swinging half-heartedly in the windless heat. Silas Wren stood by the fence line, boots caked in dry clay, eyes fixed on nothing and everything. In one hand he held his hat, in the other, a worn flask that hadn't seen whiskey in 6 years. Not since Lily passed. She was buried out back, under the big sycamore where they'd said vows before God and wild horses. Every morning before the sun split the ridge, Silas went to her grave. He didn't pray. Didn't talk much. Just stood there, a man carved hollow by grief and time. The cows hadn't been giving milk lately. The land was cruel like that. When it sensed weakness, it piled on. And Silas, well, he hadn't touched a woman since Lily died. Hadn't touched much of anything really besides rusted tools and broken fence wire. He glanced toward the barn. A hinge had snapped clean off last week. The gate swung wildly during the night, thudding in the dark like a heartbeat too stubborn to quit. He'd meant to fix it. He meant a lot of things lately and did few of them. At the far edge of the field, a shape appeared, slow and jerking like it didn't quite belong. A wagon maybe. He narrowed his eyes. Not many folks passed through these parts. The ranch was 20 miles from town, past hills most didn't care to climb and across rivers dry 9 months of the year. The only soul who came out this far was Sheriff Camden, and he only came to collect. The wagon creaked to a stop near the front post. Silas didn't move. Dust settled in the wake like smoke behind a gunshot. From the shadows stepped a woman, long coat, thick boots, and a slanted grin that looked both amused and dangerous. Her eyes were dark, sharp, the kind that made you feel you'd already told her your secrets. Behind her came a thin man with a sunburned neck and a smile that never quite reached his eyes. He walked like a man who used to dance. Last off the wagon was a heavy-set woman, quiet, eyes fixed on Silas like she was measuring something. She didn't smile. Didn't blink either. She carried a milking pail in one hand, a rope in the other. Silas set his flask down on the post. "You folks lost." The woman with the grin stepped forward. "That depends. You Silas Wren?" He didn't answer right away. "Who's asking?" "Name's Maeve," she said. "That's Jonah and the quiet one's Rosie. Heard you might need help." "From who?" She smiled wider. "Cows told us." Silas let the silence stretch. The only sound was a crow somewhere in the distance and the far-off creak of the windmill. Then Rosie turned without a word and marched toward the barn. She ducked under the broken hinge, found a stool that should have collapsed under her weight, and started milking the oldest cow, Bruna. Bruna didn't kick or protest. Just sighed, content. "She don't talk much," Maeve said, jerking her chin toward Rosie. "But cows like her." "I didn't ask for help," Silas said. Jonah stepped forward, arms crossed loosely. "You didn't ask for loneliness either. But here we all are." Silas felt something tighten behind his ribs. A small voice in his head, it had Lily's sound, whispered to be polite. But he shook it off. "This ain't an inn. I don't take in drifters." Maeve stepped closer. "We ain't looking for a bed. Just a place to stand a spell. We'll pull our weight. Won't be here long." He looked at her coat, dusty but fine. At Jonah's boots, patched but expensive once. Rosie's pail already half full with milk. They were strangers but not strangers to work. That made them different than Camden's usual types. Still, unease crawled along his spine. "Fine," he said. 3 days. You work. Then you move on." "Generous," Maeve said. "I ain't generous. Just tired." That night, the fire crackled low inside the ranch house. Silas hadn't shared a meal with anyone in years, but there they were. Rosie spooning stew into her mouth silently, Jonah talking about stars and gunfighters like they were the same thing, and Maeve watching Silas with interest that felt too heavy. "You always live this quiet?" she asked. "Since Lily," he replied, then regretted the name spilling out. Maeve softened. "She the one buried by the tree?" He nodded once. "Died giving birth. Boy didn't make it either. Took all the music with her." Jonah paused. "You play, Silas?" "Used to. Now I listen to wind." There was a beat of stillness then, something thick in the air like unspoken prayers. Then Jonah started humming, soft and low, a song Silas almost recognized. A lullaby maybe. Rosie stared into the fire like she could see something moving inside it. Later, when the others turned in, Silas stayed outside. Stars were scattered like bones across the sky. He felt something stir in him, something not quite pain, not quite hope. Maeve stepped out onto the porch. "You got ghosts," she said quietly. "We all do." She looked past him toward the barn. We've been running a while. Not from the law exactly. From worse. Silas waited, but she didn't say more. He didn't ask. I ain't touched anyone since Lily, he said finally, unsure why he confessed it to this stranger. Maeve didn't laugh or smile. She looked him square in the face. You ain't dead either. He turned from her, uncomfortable. Don't mean I'm alive. She moved closer, not enough to touch, but near enough to feel her heat. You will be. The wind picked up just enough to rattle the windmill once. Somewhere in the barn, a cow mooed softly. Silas didn't sleep well. His dreams were full of Lily's voice, half singing, half weeping. He woke before dawn and walked to her grave. Dirt clung to the edges of her stone. He knelt and brushed it off, slow and deliberate. I let strangers in, he said aloud. Don't know if that makes me weak or just tired. The sun cracked the edge of the hills in thin gold lines. From the barn came the clatter of buckets. Rosie was already working. Jonah wandered near the well, sketching something in the dirt with a stick. Maeve leaned against a post, arms crossed, watching Silas like she could read the shape of his soul from 20 yards. He walked toward her. You're up early. We don't sleep heavy, she replied. Silas studied her face, weathered but alive. Where you three headed? Maeve tilted her head. Ain't figured that out yet. Just west. Always west, he murmured. Only direction worth going, she said with a wry smile. You keep looking back, you'll trip over your own damn feet. She started to walk away, then paused. Looked at him over her shoulder. You'll do just fine, Silas. He stood there a long while, heart echoing too loud in his ears. Maybe it was the words. Maybe the way she said them. Like she already knew what was coming. By noon he found himself repairing the barn hinge. Maeve helped without asking. Jonah brought nails. Rosie said nothing but left a steaming cup of coffee where he'd sit next. He didn't know what they were really after, or why they'd chosen his ranch to stop. But something had shifted. The cows were milking again. The fences were standing. The silence that once felt like death had turned into something else. Unfamiliar but not unwelcome. For the first time in years, Silas Wren wondered if the land had more to offer than dust and ghosts. The sun rose without apology the next morning, spilling over the hills like it meant to expose every sin ever buried beneath that dry earth. Silas stood at the porch, mug in hand, watching Jonah chase a wayward calf back toward the pen. The man moved like water, graceful, unhurried, speaking to the animal like it understood every word. Silas didn't trust it. Nobody who'd wandered this long should be that at ease. Rosie was already in the barn milking. She hadn't said a full sentence since arriving, but she worked with mechanical efficiency. No wasted movement. No hesitation. The cows didn't flinch under her hands. They welcomed her like an old friend. Silas found himself both impressed and uneasy. Maeve was last to rise, hair tied back, coat slung over one shoulder. She didn't greet him. Just sat on the porch rail and stared out over the fields like she owned them. You always let strangers run your ranch? She asked, voice low and casual. I don't recall asking you to stay longer than 3 days, Silas said. You didn't? But we're here and things are getting done. Cows are calm. Fences fixed. You slept, didn't you? He didn't answer. That alone was enough of an answer. Maeve grinned. Didn't think so. They worked through the morning, side by side but mostly silent. Maeve nailed new slats into the east fence. Jonah tended the chickens, singing softly under his breath, some mournful tune about rivers and war. Rosie sharpened tools under the sycamore, each scrape rhythmic and deliberate. Silas couldn't remember the last time so much happened on his land without him giving orders. At noon, they gathered under the half-rotten awning for stew Rosie had thrown together from whatever was still edible in the root cellar. The silence between them wasn't awkward, it was thick with unsaid things, like everyone understood that to speak too much might disturb something fragile. Jonah finally broke it. This place, it's holding on to grief. Maeve gave him a sideways glance. Don't get poetic too early, John. No, he's right, Silas muttered. Grief don't leave easy. It grows roots. Jonah tilted his head. Ever try digging it up? Silas looked away. I buried her too deep. No one said anything for a while after that. Later that afternoon, Silas took the wagon into town. He needed feed, nails, a new coil of rope. As he rode past the old mining road, a man flagged him down, thin, with cracked lips and a wide hat that shadowed most of his face. You Wren? The man asked. Silas slowed the wagon. Who's a skin? Just someone who thinks you should watch who you let on your land. Silas narrowed his eyes. You know them? I know people like them, the man said. The quiet ones are the ones to worry about. They come smelling like help, but they're always running from something. Justice maybe. Maybe worse. The man didn't wait for a reply. He walked off, boots raising dust like he never wanted to be followed. Silas watched him disappear into the chaparral, unsettled. He didn't like riddles, and he sure as hell didn't like strangers who thought they knew his life better than he did. By the time he made it back to the ranch, the sky was bruising at the edges. The sun hung low, the color of blood and old brass. Jonah was sitting on the fence, playing a harmonica so softly it barely disturbed the crickets. Maeve leaned against the barn door, arms folded, coat off, revealing a shoulder holster that hadn't been there before. Rosie stood by the trough, rinsing blood off a knife. Silas stared. What happened? Maeve didn't blink. Snake. Got too close to the chickens. Rosie don't like snakes, Jonah added with a chuckle. She always carry that blade? Maeve shrugged. She carries worse. That's just the one she likes. Silas opened his mouth, then shut it. Decided now wasn't the time to ask. He dropped the supplies by the porch and stepped inside. But the air felt thicker now. Charged. Like something had shifted while he was gone. That night they didn't eat together. Everyone drifted. Rosie vanished into the barn. Jonah stayed outside watching the moon rise. Maeve sat in Silas's rocker like it belonged to her. You trust us yet? She asked when he stepped onto the porch. No, Silas said. But I trust the cows. They seem calmer. Maeve smiled. Animals know when people carry death on them. You ever seen a dog bark at a man just 'cause he walked funny? I've seen dogs bark at ghosts. She leaned forward. You think we're ghosts? I think you've got ghosts behind your eyes. I think you've seen more than you're telling. And I think one of you is gonna bring trouble. Good instincts, she said. But it's not one of us. It's all three. The wind picked up, sharp and sudden, lifting dust into the air. Silas didn't flinch. He'd lived too long in the dry lands to fear the wind. Maeve lowered her voice. Sheriff Camden's not gonna like us being here. Silas raised an eyebrow. You know Camden? She ignored the question. He ever show up when your wife was sick? No. Thought so. Silas clenched his jaw. You talk like you know him. I know men like him. Crooked smiles. Empty hearts. They wear a badge, 'cause it's easier than earning respect. He was a friend once. He still is. No. Then you'll understand what's coming. She stood then, brushing dust from her pants. Sleep well, Silas. He didn't sleep at all. The house groaned in the dark like it had old secrets to tell. He kept hearing footsteps that weren't there, voices whispering under the floorboards, Lily's laugh in the silence. When he finally drifted into sleep, he dreamed of fire. The barn ablaze. Jonah lying in the dirt, blood blooming on his chest. Maeve standing over a man's corpse, gun smoking in her hand. Rosie walking away alone, her boots sinking into red mud. He woke gasping, sweat-soaked, heart hammering. The sun hadn't risen yet. The next morning, Silas went to Lily's grave again. He sat cross-legged in the dirt, turning his hat in his hands. They're hiding something, he murmured. But they haven't lied. Not yet. The wind answered with a soft hiss through the grass. He stayed there for a while until the sun painted the hills gold again. When he returned to the house, Maeve was waiting. She handed him a mug of coffee like she had every right to be there. I dreamed about fire, he said. She nodded. We all do, eventually. Is there something coming? Maeve didn't answer right away. You ever notice how quiet it is here? Always. Too quiet. Like the land's holding its breath. He looked out toward the horizon. There was no smoke, no riders, no warning. But something was out there. He could feel it. Like a storm that hadn't quite decided which direction to blow. That afternoon, Sheriff Camden arrived. Silas saw the dust trail before the man even crested the ridge. Camden rode with two men, both armed, neither smiling. He dismounted like he owned the place, which in his mind, maybe he did. Well hell, Camden drawled. Didn't expect company, Wren. Silas kept his stance calm. You hear about the death? Partly. Mostly just wanted to check in. Heard there's been new faces round these parts. Maeve stepped out of the barn, wiping her hands on her trousers. Jonah followed silent. Rosie appeared a moment later, flanking them like the back of a triangle. Camden's smile faltered just slightly. You folks settin' up shop here? Maeve didn't smile. Just passin' through. That right. Camden looked to Silas. You vouching for them? I'm not vouching for anyone, Silas said. They work. That's all. Camden chuckled. Workin' women, huh? Thought you gave up on company. Silas didn't take the bait. You want something, Camden? I want my money. Or a piece of the land. Maeve stepped forward just slightly. You'll get neither. Camden's eyes sharpened. You think you got a say in that? I think you'd be smarter to leave before you find out what I got. Camden took a moment, assessing. His men shifted, uncertain. Then he tipped his hat, smile like a knife. 3 days, Ren. After that, I stopped being friendly. They watched him ride away, dust curling behind like smoke from a fuse. Silas turned to Maeve. You poke a bear long enough, it'll bite. I don't poke, she said. I set traps. Silas stared at the hills, at the silence pressing down. He didn't know what was coming, but he knew it would change everything. And the worst part? Some small, shameful part of him welcomed it. Silas Wren rose before the sun. The sky hung pale and heavy as if holding its breath. The ranch sat still, but something in the air felt changed. The kind of silence that doesn't soothe, it listens. He passed the barn and paused. The cows were already restless. A lantern glowed faintly inside. He pushed the door open quietly. Jonah was crouched near the far wall, half in shadow, digging. His hands were covered in dirt, nails dark and ragged. Nearby, something metallic glinted faintly. Silas stepped forward. What the hell are you doing? He said. Jonah froze, turned slowly, not startled, just caught. Wasn't trying to hide it, he said, wiping his hands on his shirt. Just didn't think you'd understand yet. Silas moved closer and looked down. In the shallow hole there was a badge, rusted, dented, still bearing the 5-point star of the U.S. Marshals. Jonah stood. Belonged to a man I rode with. Died years ago. Thought burying it might keep him close. Why here? Silas asked. Because this land remembers things. Thought maybe it'd remember him too. Silas didn't respond. The badge caught a beam of sunlight, cold and wrong-looking in the dirt. You were a marshal? He asked. Long time ago, Jonah replied. Before the war. Before I figured out justice had a price and no one was willing to pay it. Silas took a step back. And what are you now? Someone trying to balance a scale that got tipped too far one way. Silas didn't like riddles and he didn't like secrets. But he saw something behind Jonah's eyes, regret maybe. Or guilt too old to run from. He left without another word. Outside, Maeve was smoking a thin roll of tobacco, perched on the porch rail again like she'd never moved. She watched him approach, eyes tracking him like a hawk. You find something? She asked. He didn't answer. She smiled faintly as if that told her enough. Rosie sat by the water trough, sharpening her knife again. Same steady rhythm, same quiet focus. Silas realized he didn't know what her voice sounded like. It struck him as suddenly wrong that he hadn't asked. By midday the sky had shifted. A thin line of smoke rose from the south. No fire, not yet, but a signal. Riders maybe. Or trouble cooking in a distant pan. Sheriff Camden's warning echoed in Silas's head. 3 days. That meant tomorrow. He rode into town again, unsure what he was looking for. The road felt shorter this time, though the land hadn't changed. Maybe it was the weight in his chest. Maybe it was knowing time was closing in. The town was quiet. Dust swirled through the alleys, catching in the corners of doorframes like old lies. He tied his horse and made for the feed store, but paused when he saw the blacksmith's door cracked open. Inside, old Caleb worked the bellows. Camden stood near the forge, arms crossed, watching iron bend under fire. Didn't expect to see you here, Silas said. Camden turned. Didn't expect you to be keeping company with vigilantes. They're helping me run the ranch. They're helping themselves. You just don't see it yet. Silas stepped closer. You planning on coming with more men? I don't plan, Camden said. I act. You ought to remember that. What did they do to you? Camden tilted his head. You think this is about me? He nodded toward the street. They're ghosts of war, Ren. Carry blood in their boots and judgment in their eyes. They're not here to save you. They're here to finish something. Silas left before he said something he couldn't unsay. Back at the ranch, the others were waiting. Maeve leaned against the post with arms crossed. Jonah sat on the porch with his harmonica resting in his lap. Rosie stood by the barn door, not moving. We need to talk, Silas said. Finally, Maeve replied. They gathered in the sitting room. Dust danced in the slanted light. Lily's photograph still sat on the mantel, watching everything unfold. I found the badge, Silas began. And Camden says you're not here by accident. Maeve gave a single nod. He's right. We came looking for him. Rosie's eyes didn't move, but something in her jaw clenched. Why here? Because this is the last place he's soft, Jonah said. The last place he thinks he's safe. Silas looked at Maeve. And what's the plan? She didn't blink. We kill him. Silas recoiled. That's not justice. It's not revenge either, Jonah said. It's the cost of peace. Silas looked between them. You should leave. We can't, Maeve said. Won't or can't. Maeve stepped forward. Camden led a raid 6 years ago. Called it a lawful sweep. Said there were bandits hiding in a canyon outside Junction. But he didn't find outlaws. He found families. My sister. Jonah's brother. Rosie's daughter. Silas went still. The air changed. We had to bury them ourselves, Maeve continued. What was left? Rosie's hands flexed around the knife. Jonah stared at the floor. Silas sank into his chair. Why tell me this now? Because you need to decide what side you're on, Maeve said. I'm on no one's side, he replied. I buried my wife. I've done enough grieving. Maeve leaned in, voice low. Then you know why it has to end. Night fell heavy and slow. The fire crackled, but no one sat close to it. Silas paced the porch, mind turning. He thought of Lily, her laughter, the softness in her eyes that made him believe the world could be kind. She would not have wanted this, but she would have understood it. He found himself in the barn again, among the cows, breathing in the smell of hay and earth. Rosie stood nearby, her hand on Bruna's flank. She looked at him. I don't know how to stop it, he said softly. She said nothing, but her eyes held a storm. Then she spoke just one word. Help. It struck him like a hammer to the chest. Her voice was low, rough, but not broken. It held weight. It held everything. Why me? He asked. Rosie turned back to the cow, steadying her hands. She didn't answer. In the dark, Silas understood something he hadn't allowed himself to see. He was part of this, whether he liked it or not. Camden wasn't just a memory. He was a wound left open, bleeding into every corner of the land. If Silas stood idle, he wasn't a bystander. He was complicit. He returned to the house and found Maeve sitting by the hearth. Her coat was folded neatly beside her, gun belt resting on top. I'll help you, he said. But we do it clean. No fire. No blood for the sake of blood. Maeve looked up at him. Agreed. Jonah entered from the side, his harmonica in his pocket now. His face was unreadable. We do it tomorrow, Maeve said. Before he brings more men. Silas nodded. Then we end this. He climbed the stairs later, slowly, each step heavier than the last. In the quiet of his room, he stared at Lily's old shawl draped over the rocking chair. He picked it up, brought it to his face, breathed in the ghost of her. I don't know if you'd forgive me, he whispered. But I can't stand by any more. The wind blew softly through the open window, rustling the curtains. The sound reminded him of her voice. Not the words, but the rhythm of them. The shape of love and loss spoken without speaking. The next dawn would bring fire or salvation. Maybe both. He lay back in bed, eyes open to the dark, listening to the creak of the windmill and the murmur of the cows, waiting for sleep that would never come. The sun had not yet broken the line of the hills when Silas Wren stepped out onto the porch with a rifle in his hand. The air was cooler than it had been in weeks, sharp and still. The earth beneath his boots felt different, tense, like it knew what was coming. Behind him, the house stood silent. Inside, Jonah was loading rounds into a revolver with slow, reverent motions. Rosie sat on the floor beside the hearth, sharpening her blade to a rhythm only she understood. Maeve stood in the doorway, watching Silas like he was something she'd waited years to see rise from the ashes. He didn't speak. Words felt like they would clutter the air. Instead, he walked to the barn, checked the doors, patted Bruna's flank for what might be the last time. He wasn't ready to lose the ranch. He wasn't ready to kill for it either. But there was no room for readiness anymore. There was only the line drawn and what stood on either side. Jonah met him at the well. Traps are set along the eastern ridge. Rosie buried a few iron spikes under the soft dirt near the corral. Camden'll ride in easy, won't see a damn thing till it's too late. Silas nodded, eyes scanning the horizon. And the barn. Maeve appeared behind them, her coat on now, gun belt slung across her hip. Reinforced. If they try to circle from the rear, we'll have them boxed. He looked at her. You've done this before. Her gaze didn't waver. Enough times to know there's no clean version. The three of them moved like a unit, worn but precise. Silas felt out of step, like a man learning to walk again after years of standing still. But they didn't treat him like a burden. They didn't offer comfort either. Just quiet inclusion. That was enough. By mid-morning, the dust cloud rose from the southern road. 5 riders. Camden in the lead, his long black duster flapping behind him like a banner. 2 of the men wore badges, though they didn't shine like they used to. The others looked like hired guns, hollow eyes, hands resting too casually near their holsters. Silas stood in the open, rifle in hand, hat low over his brow. He waited near the broken fence post, the one Lily used to lean against when she watched the cattle roll in. Camden reined in his horse 20 paces away. "Didn't think you had it in you, Wren?" Silas didn't respond. Camden gestured to the house. "Where's your company?" "Inside. Working the land." The sheriff's eyes narrowed. "You gonna hand them over, or is this where the blood starts?" Silas took a step forward. "They're not yours to take." Camden laughed, sharp and bitter. "Everyone out here belongs to someone. You've just forgotten which side you're on." "I haven't forgotten a damn thing," Silas said. "You come here threatening people who haven't done wrong. You killed innocents and buried it under law. That ain't justice. You don't know what justice looks like. I know what my wife looked like when she died without anyone coming to help. I know what fear smells like when it comes in the form of a badge and a smile." Camden's hand drifted toward his hip. "Then I guess you're ready?" A single shot cracked from the barn. One of the deputies fell off his horse before he could draw. Jonah's silhouette emerged from the shadows, smoke rising from the end of his revolver. Chaos erupted. Horses screamed and kicked. The hired guns scattered left and right. Rosie burst from behind the trough, blade flashing as she closed the distance to one rider, pulling him from his saddle before he could shout. The man hit the ground hard and didn't rise. Maeve fired from the rooftop. Her bullets flew clean, each shot measured. Camden ducked and returned fire, his rounds splintering wood beside Silas's head. The air turned thick with smoke and grit. Silas dropped to a knee and fired. His first shot missed. The second found a shoulder, spinning a rider off his horse. He heard Jonah shouting, voice fierce and full of memory. Rosie fought without a sound, a storm made flesh. Blood sprayed across the dust as she felled another man, not hesitating. One of Camden's men reached the side of the house, reloading behind the rain barrel. Silas moved fast, heart pounding, and rounded the corner. The man raised his weapon, but Maeve appeared beside him, knife to his throat before he could pull the trigger. Camden retreated toward the far fence, firing blindly. He wasn't used to losing. The sheriff had always lived by fear, not by force. Jonah caught a bullet in the gut. He staggered, blood soaking his shirt, but he kept firing. Silas reached him, dragging him behind the cart. "Stay down," he said, pressing a hand to the wound. Jonah smiled weakly. "Told you. I never missed the opening act." Maeve took aim at Camden, but hesitated. Silas saw it, an old hesitation forged from history. "I'll do it," he said. Maeve didn't argue. She handed him the rifle, eyes locked on Camden, who now stood alone, breath ragged, blood dripping from his left hand. He looked older, smaller. The badge on his chest gleamed like a joke. "You could have let it be," Camden growled. "I did," Silas said. "For too damn long." He pulled the trigger. The rifle kicked back. Camden fell without grace, mouth half open, eyes still fixed on Silas in disbelief. The dust swallowed him whole. Silence followed, broken only by the soft, shocked whinnying of horses and the crackle of a broken fence catching in the breeze. Rosie knelt beside Jonah, her blade abandoned, her hands pressed to his chest as if willing his heart to keep going. Maeve sat on the porch step, eyes far away. She looked tired, the kind of tired that doesn't go away with sleep. Silas stood in the middle of it all, blood on his shirt, smoke in his lungs, and something unfamiliar thrumming beneath his ribs. He walked over to Jonah and knelt beside him. "Still with us?" he asked. Jonah coughed, then grinned. "Wouldn't miss the ending. We're not there yet." Rosie didn't speak, but her hand found Silas's for the briefest moment, calloused, strong, shaking. They buried the bodies that afternoon. Camden went far from Lily's grave, deeper in the hard soil near the gully. The others they buried without names. Just crosses. The kind that fade into the land. Jonah, too weak to dig, watched from the porch, eyes glassy but alert. Maeve stood over Camden's grave for a long time before placing his badge on the dirt and walking away. The sun dropped low, long shadows stretching over the blood-soaked earth. Silas sat on the porch, rifle across his lap, eyes fixed on the horizon. The land was quiet again. But not empty. Something filled the space where fear had once settled. Not peace, not yet, but the shape of it. Maeve joined him, a bottle of whiskey in hand. She offered it. He took a drink, wiped his mouth. "First one in years," he said. "Deserved," she replied. He looked over at her. What now? We ride, she said. Rosie and I. Jonah needs a doctor, maybe a miracle. We won't trouble you more. You weren't trouble. She raised an eyebrow. That a compliment? Don't push it. They both smiled, small, tired things. But real. She stood, glanced down at him. You'll do just fine, Silas. He nodded. So will you. As she turned to leave, her shadow stretched long across the porch. Rosie followed, her hand brushing the doorway once as if committing it to memory. Jonah, barely conscious, was lifted gently into the wagon. They left without ceremony. Silas watched until the dust swallowed them, until the land reclaimed its quiet. Then he looked out across the ranch. The cows had settled. The windmill turned, slow and steady. He saw Lily's grave and beside it, the 3 empty markers they'd placed that afternoon. He knew he wasn't alone anymore. Even if the porch was empty. Even if the silence had returned. This time it wasn't hollow. This time it waited for something new. The morning after they left, the ranch felt wider somehow. Not emptier but stretched, like something had exhaled after being held tight too long. Silas Wren walked the perimeter with slow, deliberate steps, checking the fence lines out of habit more than need. The traps were gone. The blood had soaked into the dust, vanished like it had never been there. But the ghosts hadn't left. They just moved quieter now. He paused at Lily's grave, the wind whispering soft across the fields. Her name was etched faint and worn from the sun, but he still traced it with a calloused finger every time. He crouched down and cleared away some loose weeds, careful, almost gentle. I did it, he said quietly. I stood up. I fought. Maybe not the way you'd have wanted, but I couldn't keep letting him poison the land. The wind shifted, carrying the smell of soil and grass and smoke long cooled. He closed his eyes. He could almost hear her voice in the hush. Not words, not exactly, but presence. Familiar and forgiving. In the weeks that followed, the ranch became something else. Children from town came out to learn to ride. Silas never advertised, never asked, but they showed up and he didn't send them away. He taught them how to saddle a horse, how to read weather from the clouds, how to listen to silence like it might say something back. Some mornings he caught himself smiling. Not wide but real. The cows were healthier. Rosie's work had left behind its mark in the rhythm of their care. Efficient, unspoken, humane. Maeve's repairs to the barn held strong, even when storms came rattling the roof. And Jonah? Well, Jonah had left behind a harmonica tucked into the rafters. Silas found it one afternoon and didn't touch it for 3 days. When he finally did, he blew one low, trembling note into the wind. The cows turned their heads. He laughed out loud for the first time in years. One evening, as the sky flared orange and purple, a rider appeared on the ridge. Silas stepped onto the porch, rifle in hand but held loose. The figure was tall, cloaked in dust, face hidden beneath a worn hat. She dismounted like she belonged there. You stayed longer than I thought, she said, not smiling, but the corner of her mouth twitched. You came back sooner than I expected. I got tired of moving. Silas stepped forward. Jonah? Alive, she said. Barely. But he's got a mouth again, so I'm guessing he'll recover. And Rosie? Gone quiet again. But you know her, quiet ain't the same as gone. He nodded and gestured to the porch. You want coffee? She took a breath. I want a place to sit. They didn't talk for a while after that. They just sat and watched the last light fade, stars rising one at a time, timid at first and then proud. The wind moved soft through the grass. You ever think of leaving? She asked. Used to, he said. Thought if I rode far enough, the grief might stop following me. But it wasn't behind me. It was in me. You can't outrun something living under your ribs. Maeve turned her head slightly. You sound like Jonah. He rubbed off a little. They laughed then, quiet and short. But it felt good, like turning a key that had been stuck for years. That night she stayed in the house. Not in Lily's room. Silas hadn't opened that door since the funeral, but in the spare room off the kitchen, the one that had always felt too empty. He didn't ask if she planned to stay. She didn't say. But in the days that followed she was still there. She helped with chores, milked Bruno without being asked, mended his coat when it tore on a barbed wire. There was a peace between them, fragile, not soft, but mutual. One morning a letter came, delivered by a boy with freckles and a loose tooth. Silas opened it at the table, eyes narrowing as he read. Maeve watched from across the room. Bad news? Worse, he said. Unfinished business. The letter was unsigned but clear in its voice. A name he hadn't heard in years, Amos Cutter. Another lawman like Camden, only meaner, smarter, and far more patient. A man from the same raid that took Rosie's daughter. Word was he'd been holed up near New Mexico, gathering his own kind. The kind who didn't believe in laws, only power. What's it mean? Maeve asked, standing now, tension creeping into her frame. It means Camden wasn't the head of the snake. She stared at him. And now they know where we are. Silas nodded. They're not done. Neither of them moved for a moment. Then she turned, grabbed her holster, checked the revolver inside. We ride at dawn. No, Silas said. She froze. I ride, he clarified. Alone. You think I'm letting you go out there without backup? I think I've spent too long letting other people bleed for me. Jonah, Rosie, this land's mine. This fight's mine. Maeve stepped close. You go alone, you die. I don't plan to die, he said. But I plan to finish it. She searched his eyes, looking for the man who'd once let the world trample him without resistance. But that man was gone. What stood before her now was someone different, hardened, steady, resolute. Not fearless but willing. She gave a single nod. You leave, I follow. You fall, I pick you up. I'd expect nothing less. That night they didn't speak again. She slept light and he didn't sleep at all. Instead he walked the ranch, whispering to the fences, the trees, the stones like they were old friends. He said goodbye in the way only men who knew how easily life slipped did, quietly, without sorrow but with deep-rooted reverence. In the morning the sky broke into fire. He saddled his horse, packed light, and rode west. The land changed as he traveled. Trees thinned. The air got sharper. Rumors turned to sightings. Camps burned in secret. The name Cutter whispered in taverns, in church pews, and behind locked doors. And then, 3 days later, in a canyon with jagged teeth for walls, Silas Wren found Amos Cutter. He waited until the sun dipped behind the rocks, casting long, reaching shadows. He rode in slow, rifle strapped to his back, revolver at his hip. Cutter sat at a fire, surrounded by 3 men, all armed. But he stood when he saw Silas, grinning like a man who'd already won. I heard about Camden, he said. Messy. Silas didn't smile. Not messy enough. You come alone? Silas glanced once behind him. No dust. No figures. No Maeve. Yes. Stupid. Maybe. Cutter stepped forward. You think killing me fixes it? No, Silas said. But it ends something. Start something else. Cutter drew first. Silas didn't hesitate. The revolver came up smooth, an extension of everything he'd held back for years. The shot rang clean. Cutter dropped, a red bloom spreading across his chest. The others scrambled. One shot grazed Silas's arm. He dropped low, fired again, took a man down. Then another. The third ran. The canyon echoed, then went still. Silas fell to one knee, hand pressed to his wound. It wasn't deep, but it burned like a memory. He looked up at the darkening sky and let out a long breath. Behind him, hoofbeats approached. She dismounted before he could speak, ran to him, cursing under her breath. You're bleeding. So are a lot of men tonight, he murmured. She tore fabric from her shirt, tied it tight around his arm. You idiot. You followed me. You expected I wouldn't? He smiled despite the pain. Didn't want you to see me fall. She pressed her forehead to his for a brief second. I came to help you stand. When they rode back into the ranch 3 days later, the windmill spun slow and sure. The cows waited patiently. The dust clung to their boots. Silas dismounted, weary but upright. He looked over the land, his land. No longer haunted. No longer burdened. And for the first time in years he didn't whisper to the grave. He didn't need to. He was already heard.